The Angry Marks Podcast Network is brought to you by WrestleWork, a social network to connect, create, and share everything about pro wrestling. Check it out today at WrestleWork.com.
You're listening to the Angry Marks Podcast Network.
We've got a former two-time TNA World Tag Team Champion, a Ring Ka King World Heavyweight Champion. He's been a two-time OVW Heavyweight Champion. He is the self-proclaimed DNA of TNA, the most genetically jacked, athletically stacked giant walking the world today. He is none other than the Blueprint, Matt Morgan. Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, guys. How are you?
Doing really well. It was initially going to be the Prophet going solo one-on-one with Matt Morgan today, and then I looked at the tail of the tape and said, you know what? Let's see. Matt Morgan is roughly 12 years younger than I am. Matt Morgan is about a foot taller than me, more than that. Matt Morgan is over 100 pounds more in weight than me, and I'm sure the carbon footprint hurts a hell of a lot. So I talked my buddy Zane Paisley and making sure he joined me today so I wouldn't have to take you on by myself.
Poor Zane Paisley. Zane Paisley, you ready to take carbon footprint?
No. This is a handicap match. I'm going to let Rick do most of the heavy lifting. I'll just come in to try to steal a win.
He pretty much just eloquated that he's Macho Man Randy Savage and you're playing akin to Miss Elizabeth and he's throwing you in front of himself as a shield. How do you feel about that?
I feel good about it. I'm ready to do this.
Just make sure you put your foot on the ropes, okay, Zane?
All right, sounds good.
All right, Matt, let's get this thing started. You know, The cool thing about it, we're in the middle of March Madness right now, a pretty exciting week of basketball. And, you know, you were a tall man. You played basketball collegiately for years. You played with Monmouth, and then you went out to Hawaii, went to Chaminade, which I remember very well as knocking off Ralph Sampson and his Virginia Cavaliers back when I was in high school. But what made you decide, and I understand you had a coaching change, but what made you decide Hawaii was where you wanted to go to college at, in Chaminade?
Because it was a tough spot because, my coach is retiring, and when a new coach comes in, generally they bring in new recruits, right? And they were bringing in two other 6'9", 6'10" guys. And you could see the writing on the wall, kind of, right? No matter how good you were or what was owed to you from the previous coach, it doesn't matter. And basically, the new coach was like, he basically was honest with me about it. So I was like, screw that. I didn't bust my ass to sit, be a sixth man or anything like that. So I wanted to go where I'd be starting. And the way it really works is if you're going to transfer to another Division I university, like Monmouth was, I'd have to sit out a year. What I was concerned with is if that happened to me where I'd have to sit out an entire year, I would lose focus, of staying in shape, because I wouldn't be able to practice or things like of that nature. And again, I wanted to play. So I was looking at the Division II schools, but that in Chaminade out of them all had this ridiculous schedule that was even better than Division I Monmouth's, where we hosted the Maui Invitational at the beginning of every season. So my first year there at Chaminade, if I transferred out there, the selling point was, look, we're going to be playing number one team in the country this upcoming year, Duke University, with Elton Brand and Shane Battier and all, the next Fab Five, they called them, of there's 5 freshmen that were starting for Duke that year.
Yeah, Jay Williams was that year too, wasn't he?
I believe so. And the main thing was after Duke, then you have 2 more ESPN games as well. And it just made sense. I'd be playing 3 straight, back-to-back ESPN games in that Maui Invitational, and I'd get more exposure with those 3 games than an entire next season with Monmouth, let's say. Because with Monmouth, we made the NCAA tournament. That was the only time we played on ESPN was our conference finals. And then, on CBS getting shellacked by Marquette in the first round of the NCAA tournament. That's not a guarantee. These guys were saying, look, here's a guarantee. We're playing 3 large universities. I think it was, I forget who it was, Syracuse, Duke, and I want to say Indiana. 3 giant universities, right, on ESPN. And if I did well, NBA scouts would see that, right? So it just made sense to transfer to that school just simply because of that.
And the cool thing about that and being able to get that exposure is you were able to get tryouts. From what I understand, you had opportunities with the Raptors, and we are based out of Indianapolis, Matt. So you got to try out with our Indiana Pacers. How did that go?
Austin Crochet was their guy. There was no question on that. And that was going to be the position that they were bringing me into camp for, to back up Austin, basically. And at this point, I have already been bitten by the sort of been bitten by the wrestling bug. I hadn't started wrestling. I had met Vince McMahon at this point already before I went to that camp, right? And so it's kind of hard. I started putting on weight and getting bigger and bigger. So I show up to Indiana Pacers camp like at 300 pounds, where I should have been probably about 250. And just not in that. I shouldn't say I wasn't in basketball shape, but I wasn't in NBA basketball shape.
Right.
And I couldn't have cared less, because I did that more of a thing to kind of calm my father down, because my father was acting as my agent at the time. And, him and my mom put a lot of money into me playing basketball over the years and sending me to certain camps and All-American camps to improve my game, to one day reach my dream, which was to be an NBA player. But that switched up dramatically once I got to college, and I really was wanting to do the wrestling thing, and then meeting Vince McMahon and him giving me some advice about, hey, we got this Tough Enough thing coming out. You might want to talk to Dr. Tom Pritchard and Jim Ross about that, see what you've got to do to send in an audition tape, kind of a thing. And I was hooked, and I never looked back. And I knew I was going to be a wrestler somehow, some way. And so, I definitely wasn't in NBA shape for that camp. There's no question about it.
Well, the interesting thing is even if you didn't make an NBA team, you still could have easily gone overseas and made some good money. But how did the wrestling bug get you, and how did you meet Vince McMahon in the first place? Did he just see your size one day and say, hey, this guy can wrestle, or how did that work?
That was kind of sort of the plan, really. A friend of mine, Marco Torelli, used to write for Raw magazine. And I'm from Connecticut. I'm from 2 towns away from Stamford. Okay? And at the time, I was working for Enterprise Rent-A-Car in Stamford, a block away from Titan Towers. And I also bounced at nighttime in Stamford as well, at the nightclubs there. So I knew the Mean Street Posse and Shane and other guys like that I'd see come through the clubs. And eventually, my friend Marco came through there and was like, hey, did you ever think about being a wrestler? And I was like, yeah, of course I have, but how do I be, where do I start, kind of a thing. And he started having me come in Friday nights to WWE headquarters with him, and we would lift weights every single Friday night at Titan Towers Gym. And because that's the nights that Vince McMahon was supposedly being there. 6 months go by, we always kept hearing we had just missed Vince by an hour or so. And I didn't have much wiggle room because I was working at Enterprise until 6 p.m. each night, so there was no guarantee. I couldn't just switch that up and show up, So I'd go every Friday night, a little bit later than Vince was. And then I guess there was one night he's training legs really late, and finally met up with him and introduced myself, told him I'm a gigantic wrestling fan. I appreciate everything he's done and stuff like that. And he just looked up at me, asked me how tall I was, how much I weighed, where I'm from. I told him about, NBA camps coming up soon, as well as an NFL combine I was doing at the time. And he had said to me that, I owed it to my family to at least try those. And if those failed, here's who you should contact from us. And that's how I started.
Outstanding. This is the Undisputed Wrestling Show, and we have the privilege today of talking to none other than the man who likes to pay for his insurance in cash, the Blueprint, Matt Morgan. Matt, I'm going to kick it on over to the bearded wonder himself, Zane Paisley. Zane, what do you have for Matt Morgan?
Well, Matt, thank you so much. I had heard that story about you lifting weights, but I'd never known how you got in there. So that was a friend of yours that was a writer for WWE Magazine at the time?
Yeah, it was before WWE. It was called Raw Magazine still at the time. Yeah.
Well, very cool. That makes a lot more sense, because I had just heard the story where you went and worked out there hoping to run into Vince. I was just trying to figure out how a 7-foot monster could just walk through the doors without being noticed. So that makes a lot more sense. So Vince then gave you the advice to try out for Tough Enough. You weren't on the season 1 though. You were on season 2, correct? How did that come about?
I was supposed to. I shouldn't say I was supposed to be on season 1. I wasn't supposed to be on any, because I still had to go out and send in a tape and all that other crap, and with the hope that people were smart enough to see a guy with a lot of potential and a lot of heart. And when you're looking for a lump of clay to form, that's the first things you should be looking at. And that was the hope. Yeah. So I sent the tape out, and it was supposed to be in time for season 1, but I sent it to Kevin Kelly, who I was told to send it to, and I think there was some sort of mix-up there where it got put in the wrong mailbox or something to that effect, but I ended up missing season 1 altogether because of something that happened like that. But sure enough, Kevin made sure it was sent in time for Tough Enough season 2, and I got, a call from the MTV crew saying that I've been selected to go to Las Vegas and try out in front of a panel of the WWE and MTV crews to see if I make it to the next round. So I still had to go out there, go into the ring and sell these guys as, for the passion that I had for wrestling. I knew everybody was going to go out there and say how great they were and this and that. And it's like, if you're a former athlete, all that stuff's going to be on your bio. They're reading it as you're in the ring. There's no reason to go out there and rant and rave about what a great athlete you are and this and that, if it's right there for them to read. So I wanted to really get over the fact that you have a hard-working giant, not just some guy who thinks size means everything, but a guy that has the heart of a smaller guy, a heart of a David, if you will, not Goliath. And because that's true. I've always had to outwork everybody and everything that I've had. Even though I'm big, not everything was always just handed to me, So this was no different, I figured.
Well, and then after that experience, you were eliminated because you had a injury, but you ended up going to OVW and training there. Was Dr. Tom Pritchard your main trainer there, or was it Rip Rogers, or who did you work with there?
Both.
Yeah,
definitely both. Tom would come in and evaluate us, and when he did, he would definitely train us. But he was high up the ladder at that time as our head of talent, kind of, sort of, as far as developmental was concerned. Rip Rogers is more the everyday trainer. So both.
We just had Danny Davis on last week, and what a great place to train. I don't think you ever trained under anybody that was recently under Bill DeMott. Do you
No.
Have you heard the stories about what happened with that?
Yeah, Bill, I did, and Bill, I myself did train under Bill when he.
Oh, okay.
There was a big challenge. There was a big change that wasn't necessarily a good change, in my opinion, when they switched Jim Ross out and they brought in John Laurinaitis as the head of talent relations. I thought that was that there was definitely a big drop off if you started noticing the talent being called up to TV once Jim Ross left that position. Jim Ross could spot talent from a mile away with a blindfold on. He was very good at going out and getting guys like myself, diamonds in the rough, that were former athletes but had a lot of passion to do wrestling and wanted to do wrestling, not that were being paid an exuberant amount of money to go train to be a wrestler and then quit 6 months later, is what kind of sort of happened when John Laurinaitis took over. The same with the girls. He'd bring in a bunch of Playboy-looking girls, pay them a shitload of money, and they wouldn't last 2 weeks, sometimes 2 months at best. So I was hired by Jim Ross, and I'm proud of that. But anyway, so when John Laurinaitis took over, there was a whole host of changes that were made to who was our trainer. We had like Al Snow there for a while. We had Lance Storm there for quite a while. Lance Storm, out of them all, of all the changes they made, was the best of the best, in my opinion. Al was good too, but Al came in toward the end when I'd already been called up to TV. But Lance Storm was really good for a lot of us that had been brought up to TV and sent back down for repackaging, because we were able to pick up like we were kind of up there already doing house shows and things like that with the training that Lance was giving us. He just wasn't giving us basic training. So my wrestling got a lot better when Lance was my trainer. Bill DeMott was brought in for a time period as well. And Bill's was a little bit different. Bill's, in my opinion, was more remedial, meaning like Bill was making us do like, push-ups, squats, and Hindus and all this crap that, in my opinion, you shouldn't be signed to a goddamn contract if you can't do. If you're not in shape, you shouldn't, excuse my language, you shouldn't fucking be there. You don't hire people to pay them to get in shape. That's a slap in the face to the rest of us that bust our ass in OVW training for 4 to 6 hours a day, learning to call matches on the fly, learning the psychology, learning our characters, which is what you're supposed to be doing, and then at night go to the gym and bust your ass and keep yourself in shape. Like, you shouldn't be told to do that. And then the fact that we wasted an hour to 2 every single day or morning doing all that crap, I could do it in my sleep. I never had an issue doing it. I never got hurt. I never got hurt doing any of Bill's stuff. And I was doing it with a mask to boot, because at the time they were thinking of putting me under their hood when they were repackaging me. It was a genius idea. So I did all that with a mask on nonetheless, and I had no issues doing it. And you want to know why? Because I was fucking in shape, and I took care of my body. So for all the slobs and the other guys and girls that they brought in that, in my opinion, weren't athletes, they would break down very easily with some of the stuff Bill had them do. That said, I saw some really good athletes that were nursing injuries. So I was lucky enough to avoid any serious injury bug down there, where you had some other guys that were doing double duty, being on SmackDown or Raw and having to come back down to developmental and do these stupid hinder squats and push-ups. And for that, I thought it wasn't smart to be having guys like that do that. WWE put in a lot of investment in these guys. They're on TV at the moment. Those guys are at a point where they shouldn't be doing that stuff. They should already be in shape and shouldn't be having to do those things. And on top of it, they're injured. So you don't have those guys do that stuff. And what would happen is those guys would get more hurt. And then now WWE's investment is now lost because they're on the sidelines being injured. So I mean, I think Bill's form of training would have been great for that's the wrong word, beginners type of training, in my opinion. Guys that are trying to get in shape but aren't in shape yet, or guys you want to weed out real quick to see if they got what it takes to have the passion for this business. I mean, I could see it through a friggin' brick wall, what he was trying to do. He was trying to break every single one of us to see how bad any of us wanted it. So do you think I'm ever going to let him say that? Fuck no. I'm not going to give him that pleasure. Are you kidding me? I went through NCAA Division I universities playing both football and basketball. You think I'm going to let Bill DeMott get over on me because of his push-ups and sit-ups and the running crap? You think I'm going to let him see me sweat? No. That's just my own confidence and arrogance and ego that I wouldn't let anybody forget Bill DeMott. I wouldn't let anybody let them see me sweat like that. You know, so I never had an issue with it because I think none of that was ever done to me. I mean, there's stuff that's been being reported about Bill. I never saw any of that really go down in OVW at all. I'm not defending what he did, but I could speak from firsthand perspective. I never saw a naked Luke Gallows with a donut in his ass being put in my mouth and stuff like that. I never saw any of that stuff take place. I honestly didn't. Bill was tough on a lot of the guys, but I never saw anything extracurricular like that. I just had heard the tales.
The Undisputed Wrestling Show. We're talking to the Blueprint, Matt Morgan. Matt, how do you summarize, I guess, your time in WWE? I mean, from the beginning, going back down, developing the stuttering gimmick, all that fun stuff.
Mm-hmm. I think WWE got a little too comfortable that they had a lot of, because they did at one point have an unbelievable assortment of young talent to pull out of developmental off of Jim Ross's eye for talent and off of Jim Cornette, Danny Davis, Rip Rogers, Lance Storm's, Tom Pritchard's training. Okay, and I think they took it for granted severely by pulling a lot of us up. I can list about 20 guys right now off the top of my head that I think should still be WWE mainstays at the moment. You know, guys like a Rene Dupree, Rob Conway, the Basham, Nick Dinsmore, John Hennigan. He left on his own accord, but John Hennigan, Joey Mercury, who's in the spot he's in now. There's so many of us. Nova, Seven, Travis Tomko. There's so many of us down there that it was crazy. Charlie Haas. The list there's so many others I'm leaving out. I'm sure. I apologize for leaving them out. Then you had a lot of great girls, Mickey James, Beth Phoenix. There's so many studs out there that we had at the moment down there. And I think they were in a situation where when we got called up, it was only a year or two after the John Cena's and Randy Orton's and Brock's got called up, right? So I think at that point it was, let's throw as much shit against the wall and see what sticks. And like we were only given like a minute to stick, you know, for a horrible analogy to use there, versus Today, what I see is happening, they're giving these guys an exuberant amount of time to stick comparatively to what it used to be when we were getting called up from developmental to TV. And I think that's because they put themselves in a rut where they didn't have the next big superstar ready, because when Johnny took over, it was different. When JR had it and he was running the developmental and who they were signing, and he was, I remember when Jim Ross signed me, he's like, we're going to leave you alone for 3 years in developmental, and you'll be the next big thing when the time comes if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And I was on track to do every bit of that. And then they called me up like in 9 months because John Laurinaitis took over. What do you say? No, I don't want to get called up to TV. No, and that's just my situation. What about the other 20 guys in girl situation? Same thing. We weren't really given time to breathe or develop certain characters that we were never really told what they wanted from us before they called us up to TV. We would just do what Jim Cornette wanted us to do in OVW, and then when we get called up, it'd be something polar opposite. If Jim Ross was still running it, they'd be a little bit more direction,
right.
And they'd leave us alone. They leave a lot of us alone, and that's what I think was missing. And then today, you have what you see with the young guys. They got a good crew down in NXT, but you had a great crew it's from 2002 to, I'd say from 2002 to 2004, 2005, right before Johnny took over, I think. They should have just been left the freak alone and to develop into season properly. And you'd have those guys main eventing still to this day. The Johns and the Randys would still be on top, I'm sure, but they'd have some more company versus being so desperate for a Seth Rollins and these other younger guys to step up and be on the same level as them in the fans' eyes. You know what I mean? There's been there's like a half a generational gap, I would say, of missed talent, if that makes any sense, in the main event scene because of what happened with how quickly they were pulling the guys up and sending them back down at that time. So I think with me, yeah, you have this big jacked up guy. He's steroid free, he's drug free. He's 6'11", he's over 300 whatever pounds. A good athlete. Problem is, they were in a spot where they didn't need that. They no matter how big I was, it didn't matter. They didn't need that. They weren't desperate to develop new talent at that moment. So they had the luxury of sending me back down and then Vince coming up with a stuttering character for me again. What do you do? Now, if he said that and he suggested that, I would have been smart enough and not green enough to have spotted something from a mile away that just wasn't me and, politely talk to him about it, that I'm not comfortable with doing it. Versus just saying, yes, sir. And then, you say jump, I say how high mentality that I had from playing college sports. That is a good mentality, but unfortunately in wrestling, you can get eaten alive with that mentality too, because people take advantage of that.